Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr Speaker, New Zealand First does not support Part 3 of the bill disestablishing the Charities Commission. Therefore, it will vote against the bill as a whole and later when it is divided. I will have no comments to make, however, on Parts 1 and 2, and my following comments relate to Part 3 exclusively. And I first of all want to refer to the procedure by which this part of the bill has got to the House. The bill was first introduced, as we know, to the previous Parliament, and people have only been given 1 month since then to make submissions to this Parliament on this bill. That is clearly and obviously a totally unreasonable and inadequate period of time for organisations involved in the charities sector to consider and make submissions. That is just not satisfactory, and it should have been much longer, at least 3 months, if not longer than that. A lot of those involved, actually, and they have told me this directly, didn't even know that this bill was coming back to the House in this form. And these are the people most directly concerned. So you see how poor this procedure has been. So there has really been very little consultation on this, and the government is sailing out on its own without taking any notice of wide public concern about the disestablishment of the Charities Commission. And I have many letters and emails to demonstrate that. So the public are really being ignored in this process, and that's a very poor process indeed. The essential problem is, of course, lack of independence for the new board. The current Commission is and is seen to be independent, and that's a great advantage for the charities sector. The transfer of these functions, as the bill does, to the Department of Internal Affairs does remove genuine independence. The new board of 3 will be seen as government lackeys simply because their functions are so utterly restricted. They will be seen to be there to do the minister's bidding. And the fine words in section 8.4, which talks about, and I quote, not subject to direction from the minister, are just that. Fine words, not in any respect real at all. And, Mr Speaker, independence is important. The purpose of the bill is said to be firstly to promote public trust. But in fact, it will do exactly the opposite. It will alienate the public from the charity sector and the government administration of it in the form that is set out in this bill. It also says that the purpose of the bill is to promote effective use of charitable resources. Now, what on earth does that mean? I haven't heard any of the government MPs describe what that is, and I would like to hear some discussion on that. Does it mean interference in where charitable resources should go? That is certainly the appearance that it gives, and if that is a purpose, it's a very bad purpose indeed. Government and its departments are not suited to that sort of function. Donors should decide, and charitable organisations should decide. Thirdly, it talks about registration and deregistration. That, of course, is already achieved, as is compliance with rules. That is already achieved. We see also that the chief executive, the new chief executive, is to have a lot of executive powers to carry out functions. And that means a lot more executive power and a lot more government power. Yes, more government, not less government, as the previous speaker asserted. It means more influence in the private affairs of people and of charitable organisations. It means more bureaucracy. It means less freedom. It means less public encouragement to donate to charities. It means less flexibility, and it means less public engagement. True independence, not just the words in the statute, must be a culture, not just some words in a statute. And that is not going to be achieved by this bill and the administration system which is set out in it. That is simply not possible in a government department. And I'm not criticising government departments for that, it's just the way they work. They're not suited to it. A separate commission with the appropriate culture, which the current commission was developing, is the right way to go. So this bill, Part 3, is entirely misconceived and cannot achieve even the purposes which is stated in the bill itself to be achieved. And it is not wanted by charities for good reasons: lack of independence, too much bureaucracy, less flexibility in administration. And I want to read to the House some of the comments of some of the communications to me. Quote, "I have not met one single person in the charitable sector that thinks the absorption of the Charities Commission into the Department of Internal Affairs is a good idea. Quote, the sector fought so hard for so many years to get a Charities Commission. Please do not allow it to be disestablished now." Quote, "The number of submissions should not in any way be taken as evidence that the sector are ambivalent about the potential loss of the Charities Commission. They are not. Everything I have seen and heard to date indicates that the sector feels very strongly that the Charities Commission should not be disestablished. Quote, no matter what measures are put in place, the proposed independent board connected to a government department is very unlikely to be perceived as independent. This will have a profound effect on the public trust and confidence, which is so important." And of course, those comments are from the sector itself and should be taken notice of by the government. What are the effects of bureaucracy? First of all, no real fair or impartial access to the system by charities and those involved with it. Secondly, no real transparency in decision-making, which is typical, I'm afraid, of government departments which do not reach out to the community and are probably incapable of doing so in any real way. What is needed, of course, is to encourage the sector and for a commission to engage meaningfully with it, not to regulate and control as governments and their departments do. Section 10, for example, makes it very clear. The CEO has functions which are set out in these terms. First of all, guidelines. Guidelines is what the CEO is to do. Does that really mean directions by the bureaucracy? I fear that it will. Secondly, we see the term, quote, model rules. That will effectively be regulations, And also in subsection 10b, the words, quote, appropriate information. What is that? Will only the CEO know what is appropriate? I fear so. Mr. Speaker, this bill is done in advance of a review of the Charities Act 1908, which is unwise, unnecessary, and it is untrue that it would establish disestablish the Charities Commission now will create a more robust, resilient agency. That's poppycock. It will do no such thing. The current Commission would do that much better. In fact, the new organisation will weaken the sector generally, and it should not be supported, and it should await the review of the Charities Act so that this can be done holistically and efficiently. This cherry-picking, this piecemeal approach by this government is very unwise and should not proceed. And for all those reasons, New Zealand First supports the charities sector, which obviously the current government does not. We support the charities sector and we support what they say, which is not what this government is doing. This bill should not be supported now and when it is subdivided later into 3 separate bills.
Kanwal Bakshi.